Harold Harrison offered 50 hectares of prime Texas land to whoever could save his dying champion horse, and every veterinarian and expert who tried had failed. Then a barefoot 12-year-old boy walked up the dusty road, knelt beside the animal everyone had given up on, and did something that left the entire county speechless. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning sun cast golden rays through the wooden slats of the stable, illuminating dust particles that floated like tiny stars in the warm Texas air. Inside the grandest stall of the Harrison Ranch, a magnificent bay stallion lay motionless on a bed of fresh straw, his powerful chest rising and falling with labored breaths that seemed to grow weaker with each passing hour. This was Thunder's Crown, a champion among champions, a horse whose name had echoed through rodeo arenas and competition grounds across the entire Southwest for nearly a decade. His ribbons hung on the wall beside him, red and blue and white, testament to victories that now seemed like distant memories, as the great animal lay dying before the eyes of those who loved him most. Harold Harrison stood at the entrance of the stable, his weathered hands gripping the wooden frame so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. At 67 years old, he had seen many things in his life, had weathered countless storms, both literal and figurative, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Thunder's Crown was more than just a horse to him. The stallion had been his partner through the darkest years of his life, through the loss of his wife Margaret, through the estrangement from his only son, through the lonely nights when the vast emptiness of his 50-hectare ranch felt more like a prison than a paradise. Now, watching the magnificent creature fade before his eyes, Harold felt as though a part of his own soul was slipping away with each shallow breath the horse took. The veterinarians had come and gone, 3 of them over the past week, each one more expensive and more renowned than the last. They had examined Thunder's Crown with their instruments and their expertise. They had consulted their textbooks and their colleagues, and in the end, they had all delivered the same devastating verdict. The horse had developed a rare degenerative condition that attacked his nervous system, something so unusual that none of them had ever seen it before in their combined decades of practice. There was no cure, they said, no treatment, no hope. The kindest thing to do would be to end his suffering, they suggested, their voices gentle but firm, their eyes avoiding Harold's gaze as they spoke the words that shattered his heart into 1,000 pieces. But Harold Harrison was not a man who accepted defeat easily. He had built this ranch from nothing, had turned barren land into flourishing pastures through sheer force of will and endless hours of back-breaking labor. He had not come this far in life by listening to people who told him something was impossible. So he had sent out word across the county, across the state, across the entire region, a desperate plea that spread like wildfire through small towns and farming communities. Anyone who could save his champion horse, anyone who could perform the miracle that the experts said was beyond reach, would receive 50 hectares of prime Harrison land as their reward. It was a fortune in property, enough to change someone's life forever, and Harold meant every word of the offer. The news had brought them in droves, these would-be saviors with their remedies and their theories and their confident promises. Snake oil salesmen arrived with bottles of mysterious elixirs, claiming their potions could cure anything from a common cold to the plague itself. Self-proclaimed horse whisperers came with their incense and their chanting, performing elaborate rituals over Thunder's Crown, while Harold watched with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Former ranch hands showed up with folk remedies passed down through generations, rubbing the horse with herbs and speaking prayers in languages Harold did not recognize. But one by one, they all failed. Thunder's Crown continued to weaken, his once lustrous coat growing dull, his eyes losing the spark that had made him the pride of every competition he entered. It was on the 7th day, when Harold had nearly given up hope, that the boy appeared. He came walking up the long dirt road that led to the Harrison Ranch, his clothes dusty from travel, his blonde hair catching the afternoon light like strands of gold. He could not have been more than 12 years old, this child who carried himself with a quiet confidence that seemed beyond his years. His name was Samuel, though everyone in his small town simply called him Sam, and he had heard about the dying champion horse from a traveling merchant who had stopped at his family's modest farm 3 days prior. Sam had no money, no education beyond what his mother had taught him from worn books by candlelight, no credentials that would impress the wealthy ranchers and professional veterinarians who had already tried and failed. What he did have was something that could not be taught in schools or purchased with gold, a gift that he had possessed since before he could remember. Sam could understand animals in a way that defied explanation. He could sense their pain, feel their fear, comprehend their needs through a connection that seemed almost supernatural. The horses on his family's farm, the chickens, the old dog that had been with them since Sam was a toddler, they all responded to him as though he spoke their language fluently. When Harold first saw the boy approaching the stable, he almost sent him away. What could a child possibly do that trained professionals could not? But something in Sam's eyes made him pause, a certainty that seemed out of place in someone so young, a determination that reminded Harold of himself in his younger days. The ranch hands gathered around, some curious, others openly skeptical, as Sam walked past them without a word and entered the stable where Thunder's crown lay dying. The great horse, who had not responded to anyone's presence for days, lifted his head slightly as the boy approached. It was the first movement he had made in nearly 24 hours, and a collective gasp rose from the watching crowd. Sam knelt beside the fallen champion, placed his small hands on the horse's heaving side, and closed his eyes. In that moment, something shifted in the air, something that everyone present could feel, but none could explain, and what happened next would leave them all speechless. The silence in the stable was so complete that Harold could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Every ranch hand, every curious neighbor who had gathered to witness this strange scene, held their breath as they watched the young boy kneeling beside the fallen champion. Sam's eyes remained closed, his small hands pressed flat against Thunder's crown side, his lips moving slightly as though he were carrying on a conversation that only he and the horse could hear. Minutes passed like hours, the tension in the air growing thicker with each moment, until finally the boy opened his eyes and looked up at Harold with an expression that made the old rancher's blood run cold. "The horse is not dying from a disease," Sam said, his voice steady and clear despite his youth. "He is dying from a broken heart. Someone hurt him, not his body, but his spirit. Something happened to him that made him lose his will to live." Harold felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He opened his mouth to respond, to demand an explanation, but the words caught in his throat as memories flooded through his mind like water breaking through a dam. He thought of the night 3 months ago when his foreman had come to him with troubling news, whispers of rough handling in the training paddock, reports of harsh methods being used to prepare Thunder's crown for his final competition season. Harold had dismissed the concerns, trusting that his staff knew what they were doing, believing that the ends justified the means when it came to maintaining his champion's winning streak. Now, looking into the knowing eyes of this strange boy, Harold understood the terrible price of his negligence. He had been so focused on trophies and titles, so consumed by the need to prove that his ranch was still the best in the region, that he had failed to see what was happening right under his nose. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and for the first time in years, Harold Harrison felt tears burning in his eyes. The other men in the stable exchanged uncomfortable glances, uncertain how to react to their employer's obvious distress, but Sam paid them no attention. His focus remained entirely on the horse before him, his young face set with determination. "Can you save him?" Harold asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The boy was quiet for a long moment, his hands still resting on Thunder's crown side, feeling the weak pulse of life that still flickered within the great animal. "I can try," Sam finally answered, "but it will not be quick, and it will not be easy. He needs to learn to trust again, to believe that not all humans will cause him pain. That kind of healing cannot be rushed, no matter how much we might wish it could be." Harold nodded slowly, understanding the truth in the boy's words, even as his heart ached with impatience. He had spent his entire life solving problems with money and power, throwing resources at obstacles until they crumbled before him. But this was different. This required something he could not buy or command, something that could only be given freely and earned through patience. From that day forward, Sam became a permanent fixture at the Harrison Ranch. Harold had sent word to the boy's family, explaining the situation and offering compensation for their son's time and expertise. Sam's mother, a widow named Clara, who had struggled to keep their small farm running since her husband's death, had been reluctant at first. She did not want her son so far from home, did not trust the wealthy rancher's motives, did not believe that a child could do what grown men had failed to accomplish. But Sam had pleaded with her, had looked at her with those eyes that seemed to see straight through to the heart of things, and in the end, she had relented. She knew, perhaps better than anyone, that her son had a purpose in this world, a calling that she did not fully understand, but could not deny. Sam moved into the small room above the stable, a humble space that had once housed seasonal workers, but had stood empty for years. He spent every waking moment with Thunder's Crown, talking to him in soft tones, sitting beside him through the long nights when the horse's breathing grew labored and his body trembled with weakness. The ranch hands watched with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief, waiting for the inevitable failure that they were certain would come. They had seen too many supposed miracle workers come and go, had watched too many confident strangers leave with their heads bowed in defeat. Why should this child be any different? But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. On the third day, Thunder's Crown lifted his head when Sam entered the stable, his ears perking forward with something that resembled interest. On the fifth day, the great horse accepted water from Sam's hands, drinking deeply for the first time in over a week. On the seventh day, he ate a small amount of grain, his appetite returning like a flame rekindling from dying embers. The ranch hands began to whisper among themselves, their skepticism giving way to cautious hope, their dismissive attitudes transforming into reluctant respect for the boy who seemed to work miracles with nothing more than patience and presence. Harold watched all of this from a distance, afraid to interfere, afraid that his involvement might somehow break the fragile spell that Sam seemed to have cast over his dying champion. He found himself thinking about his own life, about the choices he had made and the prices he had paid for his success. He had built an empire, had accumulated wealth and power beyond what his younger self could have imagined, but what had it cost him? His wife had died alone in a hospital room while he was negotiating a land deal 3 states away. His son had left home at 18 and never returned, sending only the occasional postcard from places Harold had never been. And now his beloved horse, the one living creature who had remained faithful through all the lonely years, lay fighting for his life because Harold had been too blind to see the cruelty being inflicted in his name. As he watched Sam working with Thunder's Crown in the golden light of another Texas sunset, Harold made a silent promise to himself. If by some miracle this boy succeeded where everyone else had failed, he would not only give him the 50 hectares he had promised, he would give him something far more valuable, something that Harold had forgotten he possessed until this strange child had appeared on his doorstep. He would give him the truth about what had happened to Thunder's Crown, and together they would make sure that justice was served. 2 weeks had passed since Sam's arrival at the Harrison Ranch, and the transformation in Thunder's Crown was nothing short of remarkable. The great stallion, who had lain motionless on the stable floor, seemingly hours away from death, now stood on his own 4 legs. His stance was still unsteady, his movements hesitant and careful, but the simple fact that he was standing at all seemed like a miracle to everyone who witnessed it. The ranch hands who had once whispered doubts behind Sam's back now greeted the boy with respectful nods when they passed him in the corridors. Even the most hardened among them could not deny what they were seeing with their own eyes, a resurrection that defied everything they thought they knew about horses and healing. Sam had developed a routine that he followed with unwavering dedication. Each morning before the sun rose over the distant hills, he would wake in his small room above the stable and make his way down to Thunder's Crown stall. He would sit with the horse in the pre-dawn darkness, not speaking, not touching, simply being present. It was during these quiet hours that the deepest healing seemed to occur, when the world was still and the barriers between human and animal grew thin. Thunder's Crown would lower his great head toward the boy, his breath warm and rhythmic, and something would pass between them that required no words to understand. As the days grew longer and the Texas heat intensified, Sam began taking Thunder's crown on short walks around the stable yard. These excursions were slow and careful, the boy matching his pace to the horse's tentative steps, never pushing, never demanding more than the animal was willing to give. Harold watched these walks from the window of his study, his heart swelling with an emotion he struggled to identify. Was it hope, gratitude, or was it something deeper, something that felt almost like redemption, as though this boy's success might somehow wash away the stains of Harold's own failures? The other horses on the ranch seemed to sense the change in Thunder's crown. They would gather at the fences when Sam led him past, their ears forward, their eyes curious and welcoming. There was none of the aggression or dominance displays that typically marked interactions between stallions. Instead, there was only acceptance, as though the herd recognized that their fallen champion was finding his way back to them. Sam noticed this behavior and smiled, understanding instinctively that healing was not just about the body or even the spirit. It was about belonging, about finding one's place in the world, about knowing that you were not alone in your struggle. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Harold finally gathered the courage to approach Sam directly. The boy was sitting on an overturned bucket outside Thunder's crown stall, watching the horse eat his evening meal with an appetite that would have seemed impossible just 2 weeks ago. Harold cleared his throat awkwardly, feeling strangely nervous in the presence of this child who had accomplished what grown men could not. Sam looked up at him with those knowing eyes, and Harold felt as though every secret he had ever kept was suddenly visible on his face. "I need to tell you something," Harold began, his voice rough with emotion, "about what happened to Thunder, about why he stopped wanting to live." Sam nodded slowly but did not speak, giving the old rancher the space to find his words in his own time. Harold lowered himself onto another bucket, his aging joints protesting the movement, and for a long moment he simply stared at his hands. These hands had built an empire, had signed contracts worth millions of dollars, had shaken the hands of governors and senators. But they had also signed off on training methods that he had never questioned, had waved away concerns that he should have investigated, had prioritized glory over the well-being of the creature he claimed to love. "There was a man named Garrett," Harold finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He was my head trainer for the past 3 years. Best in the business, everyone said. He had a way of getting results that no one else could match. I was so proud of the ribbons he helped us win, so focused on maintaining our reputation, that I never asked how he achieved those results." Sam listened in silence, his young face solemn and attentive. He could feel the weight of what Harold was about to reveal, could sense the guilt and shame that radiated from the old man like heat from a dying fire. Thunder's crown shifted in his stall, his ears flicking back as though he too was listening, as though he understood that the truth was finally being spoken aloud. "I found out later, after the veterinarians started coming and going, after everyone had given up hope," Harold continued. "Garrett had been using methods that I would never have approved if I had known. Isolation, deprivation, fear. He believed that breaking a horse's spirit was the key to controlling them, to making them perform on command. He kept Thunder alone for hours, sometimes days. He used devices that caused pain when the horse did not respond exactly as commanded. He created an environment of constant stress and terror, all in the name of winning competitions." Harold's voice cracked, and tears began to stream down his weathered cheeks. "And I let it happen. I was so consumed by my own pride, so desperate to maintain my legacy, that I failed to protect the one creature who had given me everything." Sam reached out and placed his small hand on Harold's trembling arm. The touch was gentle but firm, carrying with it a warmth that seemed to penetrate straight to the old man's heart. "You did not know," the boy said softly, "and now that you do know, you have a choice about what happens next. Guilt can either destroy us or teach us. It can either keep us trapped in the past or set us free to build a better future." The words seemed too wise for someone so young, and Harold looked at the boy with wonder. Who was this child who spoke like an old soul, who healed animals with his presence, who seemed to understand the deepest workings of the human heart. But before he could ask, Sam stood up and turned back toward the stable, leaving Harold alone with his tears and his newfound determination to make things right. The days that followed Harold's confession seemed to carry a different weight, as though the truth that had been spoken aloud had somehow changed the very air on the ranch. Thunder's crown continued to improve, his steps growing stronger, his eyes regaining the spark that had once made him the envy of every horse breeder in Texas. But there was something else happening too, something that went beyond the physical recovery of a single horse. The entire ranch seemed to be transforming, shedding old skin to reveal something new and unexpected beneath. And at the center of this transformation was Sam, the quiet boy who spoke to animals and healed wounds that no one else could see. Word of Thunder's crown's miraculous recovery had begun to spread beyond the boundaries of the Harrison Ranch. Neighbors who had initially dismissed the story as exaggeration came to see for themselves, standing at the fence line with wide eyes as they watched the once-dying champion trotting around the paddock with Sam at his side. Local newspapers sent reporters who scribbled frantically in their notebooks and snapped photographs that would appear on front pages across the county. A television crew even arrived one afternoon, their cameras capturing footage of Sam and Thunder's crown that would be broadcast to thousands of viewers who could hardly believe what they were seeing. Through all of this attention, Sam remained remarkably unchanged. He answered questions politely but briefly, never seeking the spotlight, never taking credit for what he insisted was Thunder's own determination to survive. When reporters asked him to explain his methods, he would simply shrug and say that he listened. That was all. He listened to what the horse was trying to tell him, and he responded with patience and love. The journalists would nod and write down his words, but few of them truly understood what he meant. How could they? They lived in a world of deadlines and headlines, where everything had to be explained and categorized and understood. Sam lived in a different world entirely, one where mysteries were accepted rather than solved, where connection mattered more than comprehension. Harold watched his young guest navigate this newfound fame with a mixture of admiration and concern. He worried that the attention might overwhelm the boy, might corrupt the pure intentions that had brought him to the ranch in the first place. But Sam seemed impervious to such dangers. He continued his daily routine without deviation, waking before dawn, sitting with Thunder's crown in the quiet darkness, taking slow walks around the property as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The cameras and microphones were simply obstacles to work around, distractions to be tolerated rather than embraced. One morning, about a month after Sam's arrival, a black truck pulled up the long driveway to the Harrison Ranch. Harold was sitting on his porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise, when he saw the vehicle approaching. Something about it made his stomach tighten with unease, though he could not have explained why. The truck came to a stop in front of the main house, and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that might have been handsome, if not for the permanent scowl that twisted his features. Harold recognized him immediately, and the coffee cup nearly slipped from his suddenly trembling hands. It was Garrett, the former head trainer, the man responsible for Thunder's crown's suffering. Harold had fired him weeks ago, as soon as he had learned the truth about his methods. The dismissal had been swift and absolute, accompanied by threats of legal action if Garrett ever set foot on Harrison property again. But here he was, striding toward the porch with the confident gait of a man who believed he had every right to be there. Harold rose to his feet, his aging body suddenly feeling every one of its 67 years, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fury. "What do you want?" Harold demanded, his voice steadier than he felt. "You have no business here anymore." Garrett stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, his dark eyes scanning the property with an expression of contempt. "I heard about the miracle boy," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The child who can heal horses with his magical touch. Quite a story. Makes for great television, I'm sure. But we both know the truth, do we not, Harold? We both know that horse was finished. Whatever trick this kid is pulling, it will not last." Harold felt his hands clench into fists at his sides. "Get off my land," he said, his voice rising. "You are not welcome here. Not after what you did." Garrett laughed, a cold and hollow sound that echoed across the quiet morning. What I did, I made that horse a champion. I took a mediocre animal and turned him into a legend. Every ribbon on that wall, every trophy in your office exists because of my methods. And this is the thanks I receive, dismissed like a common criminal, replaced by a child who probably cannot even saddle a horse properly. The confrontation might have escalated further if not for the sudden appearance of Sam at the corner of the stable. The boy had heard the raised voices and come to investigate, and now he stood watching the two men with those calm, knowing eyes that seemed to see straight through to the heart of things. Garrett turned to look at him, and something shifted in the former trainer's expression. For just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, as though he sensed something in the boy that he could not explain or control. "So this is the miracle worker," Garrett said, his voice dropping to a more measured tone. "Tell me, boy, what exactly do you think you are doing with my horse?" Sam did not flinch, did not look away, did not show any sign of the fear that a child might reasonably feel when confronted by such an intimidating figure. "He is not your horse," Sam replied quietly. "He never was. You may have trained his body, but you never touched his heart. That is why you could not save him, and that is why I can." The words hung in the air between them, simple but devastating, and for the first time in his life, Garrett found himself without a response. The silence that followed Sam's words seemed to stretch across the entire ranch, freezing everything in place like a photograph. Garrett's face had gone pale, his confident smirk replaced by something darker and more dangerous. No one had ever spoken to him that way, certainly not a child barely old enough to reach a horse's shoulder. He took a step toward Sam, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the dusty ground, his hands curling into fists that had broken more than a few bones over the years. But before he could take another step, Harold moved to stand between them, his old body straightened with a resolve that surprised even himself. "That is enough," Harold said, his voice carrying an authority he had not felt in years. "You will leave now, Garrett, and you will not return. If I see you on my property again, I will have you arrested. This is not a threat. It is a promise." Garrett's eyes darted between the old rancher and the boy behind him, calculating his options, weighing the satisfaction of violence against the consequences it might bring. In the end, practicality won over pride. He took a step back, then another, his lips twisting into a sneer that promised this was not over. "You are making a mistake, Harold," Garrett said as he climbed back into his truck. "That boy is filling your head with nonsense. Horses do not have hearts to break. They are animals, tools to be used and discarded when they are no longer useful. You used to understand that. You used to be a winner. Now look at you, taking advice from a child and pretending it is wisdom." The truck's engine roared to life, and Garrett drove away in a cloud of dust, leaving behind a tension that would take hours to fully dissipate. Sam watched the truck disappear down the long driveway, his young face thoughtful but untroubled. He had encountered men like Garrett before, though never quite so large or so openly hostile. They were everywhere in the world, these people who saw animals as objects rather than beings, who measured value only in terms of what could be extracted or exploited. They frightened him sometimes, but they did not discourage him. If anything, they strengthened his resolve to show that there was another way, a better way, to exist alongside the creatures who shared this earth with humanity. Harold placed a trembling hand on Sam's shoulder, and the boy looked up to find the old rancher's eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I am sorry you had to see that," Harold said quietly. "I am sorry I ever let that man near Thunder. I am sorry for so many things." Sam shook his head gently, a gesture of forgiveness that seemed far too mature for someone his age. "We cannot change what has already happened," he replied. "We can only choose what happens next. And you have already made that choice. You chose to tell the truth. You chose to protect Thunder. That is what matters now." The encounter with Garrett had shaken the ranch, but it had also unified it in unexpected ways. The ranch hands, who had witnessed the confrontation from various vantage points around the property, began treating Sam with a new level of respect. He was no longer just the strange boy who talked to horses. He was someone who had stood his ground against a man twice his size, someone who had spoken truth to power without flinching. They started seeking him out for advice about their own animals, asking his opinion on matters of feeding and training and care. And Sam, patient as always, answered every question with the same thoughtful attention he gave to Thunder's crown. Meanwhile, Thunder's recovery continued to accelerate. The great stallion was now spending most of his days in the paddock, his muscles rebuilding, his coat regaining its lustrous shine. He would gallop short distances, testing his legs, remembering what it felt like to move with power and grace. When he ran, Sam would stand at the fence and watch, his face lit with a joy so pure that even the most cynical observer could not help but smile. This was why he had come. This was what he had been born to do. The connection between boy and horse had grown so strong that they seemed to communicate without words, anticipating each other's movements, responding to each other's moods with an intimacy that bordered on the mystical. Harold began spending more time at the stable, drawn by something he could not quite name. He would sit on an old wooden chair near Thunder's stall, watching Sam work, listening to the boy's soft murmurs and the horse's gentle responses. Sometimes they would talk, the old man and the young boy, their conversations ranging from practical matters of ranch management to deeper questions about life and death and the nature of love. Harold found himself sharing things he had never told anyone, memories of his late wife, regrets about his estranged son, fears about what would become of the ranch when he was gone. And Sam listened, truly listened, with a patience that made Harold feel heard for the first time in decades. One afternoon, as the summer heat pressed down on the ranch like a heavy blanket, Harold asked Sam about his gift. Where did it come from, this ability to understand animals? Was it something he had learned, or something he had always possessed? Sam was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on Thunder's crown as the stallion dozed peacefully in a patch of shade. I do not know where it comes from, he finally admitted. My mother says I was born with it, that even as a baby I would calm crying animals just by being near them. But I do not think of it as a gift, not really. It is more like a responsibility. The animals trust me to hear them, to speak for them when they cannot speak for themselves. That trust is not something I take lightly. Harold nodded slowly, absorbing the boy's words. And what does Thunder tell you? He asked. What does he say about what happened to him? About Garrett? About the future? Sam turned to look at the old rancher, his eyes holding a wisdom that seemed to span generations. He says that pain can teach us if we let it, Sam replied softly. He says that even the deepest wounds can heal if we find someone willing to sit with us in the darkness. And he says that he is not afraid anymore because he knows now that he is not alone. The words hung in the warm afternoon air, and Harold felt something shift inside his chest, as though a door long rusted shut was finally beginning to open. The summer days stretched long and golden across the Harrison Ranch, each one bringing new evidence of Thunder's crown's remarkable recovery. The stallion who had once lain dying on a bed of straw now moved with something approaching his former majesty, his powerful legs carrying him across the paddock with increasing confidence, his head held high as though remembering who he had once been. The ranch hands would pause in their work to watch him run, shaking their heads in disbelief at the transformation they had witnessed. Some called it a miracle, others called it magic, but Sam knew it was neither of those things. It was simply love, patient and persistent, given freely without expectation of return. As Thunder's body healed, something unexpected began to happen. Other animals on the ranch started seeking out Sam's presence, drawn to him by some invisible force that none could explain. Horses who had been skittish and difficult to handle became calm when he approached. Dogs who had been aggressive toward strangers would roll onto their backs for belly rubs when Sam walked by. Even the barn cats, notoriously independent creatures who tolerated humans at best, would curl around his ankles and purr with contentment. The ranch, which had always been a place of work and productivity, was slowly transforming into something else entirely. It was becoming a sanctuary. Harold observed these changes with a mixture of wonder and growing affection for the boy who had brought them about. He found himself thinking of Sam almost as the son he had lost, the relationship that had slipped through his fingers so many years ago. His actual son, Michael, had left home at 18 after a bitter argument about the future of the ranch. Harold had wanted him to stay, to take over the family business, to continue the legacy that had consumed Harold's entire life. But Michael had wanted something different, something more, something that his father could not understand or accept. They had exchanged harsh words that night, words that could never be taken back, and Michael had walked out the door without looking behind him. That was 15 years ago. Since then, there had been only occasional postcards, brief phone calls on holidays, a distance that seemed to grow wider with each passing year. Harold had told himself that he was too busy to reach out, too proud to apologize, too set in his ways to change. But watching Sam with Thunder's Crown, seeing how patience and humility could heal even the deepest wounds, Harold began to question everything he thought he knew about himself. Perhaps it was not too late. Perhaps the walls he had built around his heart could still be torn down, if only he had the courage to try. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Harold made a decision that had been forming in his mind for weeks. He sat down at his desk, pulled out a sheet of paper, and began to write a letter to his son. The words came slowly at first, rusty from years of disuse, but gradually they began to flow. He wrote about the ranch, about Thunder's Crown, about the remarkable boy who had appeared out of nowhere and changed everything. He wrote about his regrets, his loneliness, his desperate hope that it was not too late to rebuild what had been broken. And for the first time in 15 years, he signed the letter with the word he had been too stubborn to use before: love. Sam knew nothing of this letter, but he sensed that something had shifted in Harold. The old rancher seemed lighter somehow, as though a weight he had been carrying for years had finally been lifted from his shoulders. They spent more time together now, walking the property in the cool of the evening, sharing meals on the porch as the stars emerged overhead. Harold told stories about the early days of the ranch, about the struggles and triumphs that had shaped his life, and Sam listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he understood more than his young years would suggest. Meanwhile, Thunder's Crown had reached a turning point in his recovery. The physical healing was nearly complete, his body restored to something close to its former glory. But Sam knew that the deeper wounds, the ones that could not be seen, still required attention. The horse flinched at sudden movements, grew anxious when strangers approached too quickly, retreated into himself when loud noises echoed across the ranch. These were the scars that Garrett had left behind, the invisible damage that would take much longer to repair. Sam worked with him every day, exposing him gradually to the things that frightened him, teaching him that not every raised hand meant pain, that not every unfamiliar face brought danger. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon, unremarkable in every way except for what it would come to represent. Sam was leading Thunder's Crown around the paddock when a truck backfired on the distant road, the sound echoing across the open land like a gunshot. In the past, such a noise would have sent the stallion into a panic, his eyes rolling white with terror, his body trembling as memories of past abuse flooded through him. But this time, something different happened. Thunder's Crown startled at the sound, his muscles tensing, his head jerking up in alarm. But then he looked at Sam, found the boy's calm eyes, and slowly, deliberately relaxed. His breathing steadied, his muscles unclenched. He took a step forward, then another, continuing their walk as though nothing had happened. Sam felt tears prick at his eyes, though he could not have explained exactly why. It was such a small thing, really, a horse not panicking at a loud noise. But he understood what it meant. Thunder's Crown had chosen to trust him, had chosen to believe that he was safe, had chosen to let go of the fear that had nearly killed him. It was a victory more significant than any ribbon or trophy, a triumph that no competition could ever measure. And as they walked together in the golden afternoon light, boy and horse moving in perfect harmony, Sam knew that the hardest part of their journey was finally behind them. What lay ahead would be different, full of new challenges and unexpected joys. But they would face it together, as they had faced everything else, with patience and love and an unshakable faith in each other. 3 months had passed since Sam first walked up the dusty road to the Harrison Ranch, and the property had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. Thunder's Crown, the horse everyone had given up for dead, now stood as a testament to the power of patient love. His coat gleamed like polished mahogany in the sunlight. His muscles rippled beneath his skin with renewed strength, and his eyes held a peace that spoke of wounds finally healed. The stallion who had lost his will to live had found it again, and the whole county seemed to know the story. People came from miles around just to catch a glimpse of the miracle horse and the quiet boy who had saved him. But as Thunder's recovery neared completion, a question began to form in everyone's mind, though few dared to speak it aloud. What would happen next? Harold had promised 50 hectares of prime land to whoever saved his champion horse, and Sam had undeniably fulfilled that promise. The boy had no legal claim to anything, no contract or written agreement, only the word of an old rancher given in desperation. Some whispered that Harold would find a way to avoid honoring his pledge, that wealthy men always found loopholes when it suited them. Others believed that the promise would be kept, but worried about what a child would do with such a vast inheritance. And still others wondered if Sam even wanted the land at all, if material rewards meant anything to a boy who seemed to live in a world beyond ordinary concerns. Sam himself gave no indication that he was thinking about the reward. He continued his daily routine without variation, caring for Thunder's crown with the same dedication he had shown from the beginning. When reporters asked him about the 50 hectares, he would simply shrug and change the subject. When ranch hands made jokes about him becoming a wealthy landowner, he would smile politely and return to his work. It was as though the promise existed in a separate reality, one that had no bearing on what truly mattered to him. The healing of the horse, the restoration of trust, the quiet joy of each day spent in companionship with a creature who had become his closest friend. These were the things that filled Sam's thoughts, not deeds or property lines or financial considerations. Harold, however, was acutely aware of the promise he had made and the obligation it represented. He had never been a man who went back on his word, and he had no intention of starting now. But the situation was more complicated than he had anticipated. Sam was a minor, legally unable to own property in his own name. His mother, Clara, would need to be involved in any transfer of land. And there was the matter of taxes, surveys, legal documents, and countless other details that accompanied such a significant transaction. Harold spent long hours with his lawyers, working through the complexities, determined to honor his commitment in full. It was during one of these meetings that a letter arrived, one that Harold had almost given up hope of ever receiving. The envelope bore a postmark from Seattle, and the handwriting on the front was unmistakable, despite the years that it had passed. Michael had written back. Harold's hands trembled as he opened the letter, his lawyers temporarily forgotten as he read the words his son had penned. The letter was short, guarded, filled with the caution of someone who had been hurt too deeply to trust easily. But it was a response. It was a beginning. And at the bottom, in handwriting that seemed almost hesitant, Michael had included his phone number and a single sentence that made Harold's heart swell with hope. Maybe we could talk sometime. That evening, Harold sought out Sam in the stable, finding the boy sitting in his usual spot beside Thunder's crown. The horse was dozing contentedly, his breathing slow and steady, his great body relaxed in the presence of the one who had saved him. Harold lowered himself onto a hay bale, his joints protesting the movement, and sat in silence for a long moment before speaking. "My son wrote back," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "After 15 years of silence, he wants to talk." Sam looked up, his young face illuminated by the soft glow of the stable lanterns. "That is wonderful," he said simply. But there was something in his tone that suggested he had known this would happen, as though the healing that had begun with Thunder's crown had always been meant to extend far beyond the stable walls. They talked late into the night, the old rancher and the young boy, their conversation weaving through past regrets and future hopes. Harold spoke of his fears about reconnecting with Michael, his worries that too much damage had been done to repair. Sam listened with his characteristic patience, offering occasional insights that seemed to cut straight to the heart of things. "Healing is not about pretending the past did not happen," Sam said at one point. "It is about accepting what was and choosing to build something different. Thunder taught me that. Every scar he carries is a reminder of what he survived, not a prediction of what he must become. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Harold felt a clarity settling over him that he had not experienced in years. The arrival of this strange, gifted boy had set something in motion, a cascade of changes that went far beyond the recovery of a single horse. Old wounds were being addressed, long-buried truths were being spoken. Relationships that had seemed irreparably broken were showing signs of new life. It was as though Sam carried with him a kind of healing energy that touched everything in his vicinity, awakening possibilities that had been dormant for years. But even as Harold marveled at these changes, a shadow was gathering on the horizon. Garrett had not forgotten the humiliation of his dismissal, had not forgiven the words that the boy had spoken to him that morning months ago. In a bar on the outskirts of town, surrounded by men who shared his bitter outlook on life, the former trainer was making plans. He would show them all that horses were meant to be broken, not coddled. He would prove that this so-called miracle was nothing but a temporary illusion. And when Thunder's crown inevitably failed, when the horse revealed his true damaged nature before the eyes of the world, Garrett would be there to say he had been right all along. The annual Harrison County Horse Fair had been a tradition for over 50 years, drawing competitors and spectators from across the entire state of Texas. It was the largest equestrian event in the region, a celebration of horsemanship that attracted everyone from professional breeders to casual enthusiasts. Blue ribbons won at the Harrison County Fair were displayed with pride in stables throughout the Southwest, symbols of excellence that could make or break reputations. For decades, Thunder's crown had been the undisputed star of this event, his victories so consistent that other competitors had begun to wonder if there was any point in challenging him. But this year would be different. This year, the question on everyone's lips was whether the miracle horse would even appear. Harold had not planned to enter Thunder's crown in the competition. The stallion had come too far in his recovery to risk setting him back with the stress of a public event. The crowds, the noise, the pressure of performance, all of these could potentially undo the careful healing that Sam had worked so hard to achieve. But as the fair approached, something unexpected happened. Thunder's crown himself seemed to sense what was coming. He grew restless in his paddock, his ears pricking up whenever he heard the distant sounds of trailers passing on the road, his body practically vibrating with an energy that had been absent for so long. Sam watched this transformation with wonder, understanding what it meant. The horse wanted to compete. He wanted to prove to himself and to the world that he was still who he had always been. When Sam shared his observations with Harold, the old rancher was torn. Part of him wanted nothing more than to see his champion return to glory, to watch Thunder's crown reclaim the titles that had once been his birthright. But another part, the part that had grown so much during these months of watching and learning, knew that such desires could be dangerous. Was he putting his own wishes ahead of what was truly best for the horse? Was he falling back into the same patterns that had led to Garrett's abuse in the first place? It was Sam who finally helped him see clearly. "This is not about what you want," the boy said gently. "It is about what Thunder needs. And right now, he needs to know that he is still capable of being who he was meant to be." The decision was made. Thunder's crown would enter the Harrison County Horse Fair, not to win ribbons or restore reputations, but to complete his healing journey. Sam would be there every step of the way, a calming presence to guide the stallion through whatever challenges arose. Harold hired additional security, determined to ensure that nothing would threaten the safety of his horse or the boy who had saved him. The ranch buzzed with preparations as the fair day approached, everyone working together with a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. Even the horses seemed to feel the excitement, their whinnies and stamps creating a symphony of anticipation. What no one knew was that Garrett had also heard about the entry. The news had reached him through his network of bitter former colleagues, men who resented the success of others and took pleasure in watching proud things fall. He had laughed when he first heard it, a cruel sound that made those around him uncomfortable. "So the old fool thinks his broken horse can compete again," Garrett had sneered. "This I have to see." But seeing was not all he had in mind. In the dark corners of his resentful heart, a plan was taking shape. one that would expose the supposed miracle for the fraud he believed it to be. The morning of the fair dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect Texas day that seemed designed specifically for outdoor celebrations. Trucks and trailers began arriving at the fairgrounds before sunrise, creating a small city of temporary stables and practice arenas. The smell of hay and horses filled the air, mixing with the aroma of coffee and breakfast cooking at the various vendor stands. Families arrived with children perched on their shoulders, eager to see the magnificent animals that had been the stuff of local legend for generations. And at the center of all this activity, the subject of countless whispered conversations, was the trailer carrying Thunder's crown. Sam had spent the night in the trailer with the horse, unwilling to leave his side even for a few hours. When the doors finally opened at the fairgrounds, he emerged looking tired but calm, his hand resting on Thunder's crown's neck as they stepped out into the morning light. A murmur ran through the crowd that had gathered to witness their arrival. The horse looked magnificent, his coat gleaming, his head held high with a dignity that seemed almost regal. But it was the way he stayed close to the boy, the obvious trust between them, that truly captured everyone's attention. This was not the relationship between a trainer and an animal. This was something deeper, something that many recognized but few could name. Harold arrived shortly after, accompanied by a small entourage of ranch hands and, to everyone's surprise, a woman who had traveled from the small farm where Sam had grown up. Clara had not seen her son in 3 months, their communication limited to occasional phone calls and letters that never quite captured everything they wanted to say. When she saw him standing there beside the great stallion, so confident and at peace, tears streamed down her weathered cheeks. "My boy," she whispered, pulling him into an embrace that spoke of all the words she could not find. "You have done something amazing here." The morning passed in a blur of activity. There were registrations to complete, veterinary inspections to pass, and countless well-wishers to acknowledge. Sam stayed focused throughout, his attention never straying far from Thunder's crown. He could sense that the horse was nervous, overwhelmed by the sights and sounds that surrounded them. But he could also feel something else beneath that nervousness, a determination, a desire to prove that the darkness of the past did not define him. And somewhere in the crowd, watching from the shadows of a livestock tent, Garrett waited for his moment, his cruel eyes fixed on the boy and horse who had made a fool of him months before. The main competition was scheduled for late afternoon, when the sun would hang low in the sky and the heat of the day would begin to fade. Until then, there were preliminary events to watch, lesser competitions that served to warm up the crowd for the main attraction. Sam used this time to walk Thunder's crown around the quieter areas of the fairgrounds, allowing the horse to grow accustomed to the unfamiliar environment. They passed other horses and their handlers, drew stares from curious onlookers, and navigated the maze of temporary fencing that divided the grounds into different sections. Through it all, Sam maintained a constant stream of quiet conversation with Thunder, his voice a steady anchor in the sea of overwhelming stimuli. Harold watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride and anxiety in equal measure. He had made a phone call that morning, one that had required every ounce of courage he possessed. Michael had answered on the third ring, his voice cautious but not hostile. They had talked for nearly an hour, father and son, stumbling through years of silence toward something that felt almost like reconciliation. Michael had even mentioned the possibility of visiting the ranch, of meeting this remarkable boy who had done what no one else could. It was more than Harold had dared to hope for, and as he watched Sam guiding Thunder's crown through the crowds, he felt as though his entire life was being rewritten. The afternoon arrived faster than anyone expected, and suddenly the main arena was filling with spectators eager to witness the return of the legendary champion. The competition would test not just speed and agility, but also the bond between horse and handler, a series of obstacles and challenges designed to showcase the full range of equestrian skills. Thunder's crown had won this event 5 years in a row before his breakdown, his performances so dominant that they had become the stuff of legend. Now everyone wanted to see if the miracle was real, if the horse who had risen from the dead could reclaim his former glory. Sam led Thunder's crown into the holding area beside the arena, where other competitors waited with their own horses. The tension was palpable, a mixture of nervous energy and competitive determination that filled the air like electricity before a storm. Some handlers nodded respectfully at Sam as he passed, acknowledging the reputation that preceded him. Others looked away, unwilling to make eye contact with the boy who had become the most talked-about figure in Texas horsemanship. And in a shadowy corner near the equipment shed, Garrett positioned himself where he could observe everything without being noticed. His plan was simple and cruel, designed to exploit the very vulnerabilities that Sam had worked so hard to address. He had obtained a device that produced a high-pitched sound, inaudible to humans but excruciating to horses. At the critical moment of Thunder's Crown's performance, he would activate it, sending the stallion into a panic that would confirm everything Garrett had always believed about broken animals. The boy's so-called healing would be exposed as a temporary illusion, and Harold would finally understand that Garrett's methods were the only ones that truly worked. It was a perfect revenge, one that required nothing more than patience and timing. The competition began with the lower-ranked horses, each one navigating the obstacle course while judges scored their performance. The crowd cheered and gasped at the appropriate moments, their enthusiasm building as the afternoon wore on. Sam stood with Thunder's Crown near the entrance gate, his hand never leaving the horse's neck, his eyes scanning the surroundings with an alertness that seemed unusual for someone so young. He could not have explained what he was looking for, only that something felt wrong, a disturbance in the energy of the place that made his skin prickle with unease. Finally, the moment arrived. Thunder's Crown's name was announced over the loudspeaker, and a roar went up from the crowd that had come specifically to see this moment. Sam took a deep breath, whispered something in the horse's ear, and together they walked into the arena. The sunlight caught Thunder's coat, transforming him into a vision of equine perfection that drew gasps from even the most experienced horsemen in attendance. He moved with a grace that seemed almost supernatural, his hooves barely touching the ground as he carried Sam toward the starting position. The course stretched before them, a series of jumps and turns and narrow passages that would test every aspect of their partnership. Sam did not carry a whip or spurs, did not use any of the traditional tools of control that other handlers relied upon. He guided Thunder's Crown with nothing more than subtle shifts in his weight, gentle pressure from his legs, and the invisible thread of trust that connected them at a level beyond ordinary understanding. They began to move through the obstacles, each one executed with a precision that left the crowd holding its breath. Garrett watched from his hiding place, his finger hovering over the button that would activate his cruel device. He waited for the perfect moment, the jump that would be most dangerous if interrupted, the turn that would send horse and rider crashing if disrupted at the wrong instant. His eyes narrowed with anticipation as Thunder's Crown approached the highest obstacle on the course, a triple combination that had defeated many horses before. This was it. This was where the illusion would shatter. But just as his finger pressed down, something unexpected happened. Thunder's Crown stumbled slightly, not from the sound but from a loose stone on the arena floor. It was a minor disruption, barely noticeable to the crowd, but it shifted the timing just enough that when the high-pitched noise pierced the air, the horse had already completed the jump. Sam felt Thunder tense beneath him, sensed the wave of fear that the sound provoked. But instead of panicking, instead of reverting to the terrified animal he had once been, Thunder's Crown turned his head slightly toward Sam, found his calm eyes, and chose to trust. What happened next would be talked about for years to come. Thunder's Crown completed the course not just successfully, but magnificently, his performance transcending anything he had achieved even in his championship years. He moved as though he and Sam were one creature, their communication so seamless that it defied explanation. And when they crossed the finish line, the crowd erupted in a standing ovation that shook the very ground beneath them. Sam slid from Thunder's back, wrapped his arms around the horse's neck, and for the first time since anyone could remember, allowed himself to cry with joy. The celebration that followed Thunder's Crown's victory lasted long into the evening, transforming the fairgrounds into a festival of joy and amazement. People who had witnessed the performance could not stop talking about what they had seen, their voices rising and falling with excitement as they recounted every jump, every turn, every moment of perfect harmony between boy and horse. Judges who had been scoring equestrian events for decades admitted they had never seen anything like it. Competitors who had hoped to defeat the legendary champion instead found themselves applauding his return, their disappointment overshadowed by genuine appreciation for what they had witnessed. And at the center of it all stood Sam, uncomfortable with the attention but unable to escape the gratitude that poured toward him from every direction. Harold pushed through the crowd to reach the boy, his weathered face streaming with tears he made no effort to hide. He pulled Sam into an embrace that said everything words could not express, holding him tightly as the chaos swirled around them. When he finally stepped back, his voice was thick with emotion. "You did it," he said simply. "You actually did it." Sam shook his head gently, turning to look at Thunder's Crown, who stood nearby accepting pats and admiration from the gathering crowd. "We did it together," the boy replied. "He did the hard work. I just reminded him who he really was." What neither of them knew was that Garrett had been discovered. A security guard, alerted by the strange sound emanating from behind the equipment shed, had investigated and found the former trainer crouching with his device. The guard had immediately recognized Garrett from the warnings Harold had distributed to his staff, and within minutes, the bitter man was being escorted from the fairgrounds by local police. He would face charges for attempted animal cruelty, his reputation destroyed by the very act he had hoped would restore it. As the officers led him away, Garrett caught one last glimpse of Thunder's Crown standing proudly in the arena, and the defeat in his eyes was absolute. The days following the fair brought changes that rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Harold's lawyers completed the paperwork for the land transfer, and 50 hectares of prime Harrison property officially became the foundation of something new. Sam, with his mother Clara's blessing, announced plans to establish an animal sanctuary on the land, a place where abused and abandoned creatures could find the same healing that Thunder's Crown had experienced. The news spread quickly, drawing offers of support from across the region. Volunteers came forward, donations arrived, and what had begun as one boy's mission to save a dying horse evolved into something far larger. But perhaps the most significant change came in the form of a rental car that pulled up the Harrison Ranch driveway on a quiet Sunday morning, 3 weeks after the fair. Harold was sitting on his porch when it arrived, his coffee growing cold in his hands as he watched the vehicle approach. He knew who it was before the door opened, knew it with a certainty that went beyond logic or reason. And when Michael stepped out, older now with gray touching his temples and lines marking his face, Harold rose on unsteady legs and walked toward the son he had not seen in 15 years. Their reunion was not easy. There were too many years of silence, too many wounds that had never properly healed. But they began to talk, father and son, sitting on the porch as the sun climbed higher in the Texas sky. They spoke of regrets and missed opportunities, of stubborn pride and broken promises. And gradually, painfully, they started to build something new on the ruins of what had been lost. Michael met Sam and was immediately captivated by the boy's gentle wisdom. He spent hours at the stable watching the relationship between Sam and Thunder's Crown, understanding for the first time what his father had tried to explain in that letter months ago. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to turn golden on the trees that lined the Harrison property, Sam prepared to return home. His work here was done, at least for now. Thunder's Crown had made a complete recovery, his spirit restored along with his body. The sanctuary plans were in motion, with Clara agreeing to relocate and oversee the daily operations while Sam continued his education. There would be visits, of course, regular trips back to the ranch that had become a second home. But the time had come for new beginnings, for the next chapter in a story that was still being written. The morning of Sam's departure, Harold gathered everyone at the main stable for a farewell that none of them would ever forget. The ranch hands who had once doubted the strange boy now lined up to shake his hand and wish him well. Clara stood with tears in her eyes, proud beyond words of the son who had accomplished something miraculous. Michael was there too, his presence a testament to the ripple effects of healing that had touched so many lives. And Thunder's Crown, the magnificent stallion who had started it all, stood at the center of the gathering as though he understood the significance of the moment. Sam approached the horse one final time, pressing his forehead against Thunder's great neck and closing his eyes. No words were spoken between them, none were needed. The bond they shared would transcend distance and time, a connection forged in the darkest hours and strengthened through patience and love. When Sam finally stepped back, Thunder's Crown let out a soft nicker, a sound that seemed to carry both farewell and gratitude in its gentle tones. As the truck carrying Sam and his mother disappeared down the long driveway, Harold stood watching until it vanished from sight. Beside him, Thunder's Crown remained still, his eyes fixed on the same horizon. The old rancher placed his hand on the horse's neck, feeling the steady pulse of life beneath the warm skin. "You know something, Thunder," Harold said quietly. "That boy taught us both what really matters. It is not the ribbons or the trophies or the land. It is the connections we make, the lives we touch, the love we choose to give." Thunder's Crown turned his head slightly, his dark eyes meeting Harold's. And in that moment of perfect understanding, both of them knew that some bonds, once formed, could never truly be broken. They would carry Sam with them always, a living reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could appear in the most unexpected forms, transforming everything it touched.